Let's rank some wide receivers in Dynasty, a top 24. We're post free agency, for the most part, post NFL combine, really getting into full NFL draft gear. Guys, for me, tier one is four guys. All right, four. A deviation, we're adding one compared to my first wide receiver rankings video a couple months back. In wide receiver one, fantasy, wide receiver one, dynasty territory. This group of four is Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra St. Brown being the recent addition because, look, wide receiver 3 season, we see how much he means to the team in the playoffs. This is a guy that needs to be in this conversation in terms of tier 1 receivers. And frankly, look, from what I'm seeing, that is the case. He is going in that fringe back end of round one. And this is really, I think, a way how to best describe this tier. These are four players that are first round type of startup picks. And even at a position that is so saturated, that is receiver, these are the type of difference makers. These are guys that even with all the quarterbacks in super flex leagues, right? Quarterback is key. Well, these receivers are absolute studs and difference makers. Obviously, you've got Justin Jefferson, who dealt with injury last year. Now there's a quarterback shakeup. I think, look, maybe with a J.J. McCarthy or any rookie QB for that matter, not named, say, Caleb Williams, right? There might be a bit of a drop-off, okay, in terms of production compared to what we've maybe seen for Justin Jefferson. At the same time, though, it could very well be he is the go-to guy, and then you see maybe the wide receiver two, a Jordan Addison, the second options in that offense, like maybe a TJ Hawkinson. Maybe they are the biggest losers, and you still see a potentially dominant season from Justin Jefferson. Look, I think he gets his contract situation resolved. I don't see how the Vikings in the right mind could let him walk. I don't see any conspiracy, crazy trades necessarily happening. Still wide receiver one for me. Chase, still holding on to wide receiver two for me because, look, I know not the best season by his standards. Joe Burrow dealing with some injuries of his own, but I can't just back off of this Jamar Chase ranking at number two, particularly when, look, T. Higgins, talk about guys that are totally dominant receiver ones in their offense. T. Higgins could very well be on the move. I think that's where I'm leaning. T. Higgins, obviously the trade request, I think in and around the time of the draft, the Bengals find a dance partner for T. Higgins, whether it be maybe the Cardinals, maybe the Patriots. That's just where I lean. And with Jamar Chase, I know it's been a little bit of an ups and a lot of downs in maybe some recent years, but I gotta still recognize him here as wide receiver two. And look, the point of this tier is in a tier, I can understand individual preferences. That is really important. And so CeeDee Lamb, I see him getting drafted ahead of Jamar Chase in first rounds. Maybe not quite the decision I would make, but a decision I can understand and respect. CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver one. Unbelievable situation with him connected to Dak in Dallas, and nothing looks like it's going to change anytime soon. Dak, there's some weird, with the whole Cowboys offseason, some weird, or not so weird if you could have seen it coming, with kind of cash strapped cap maneuvers, handicapping maybe the moves that they can do, and just investments that they can potentially make at this point in time in the NFL calendar. But I don't see how they let Dak Prescott potentially walk in a year or two, right? I think they resolve that contract soon enough, and I think that just bodes well for CeeDee Lamb's long-term future. And then with Amon-Ra St. Brown, talk about long-term futures. Look, Jared Goff, I think he is rumored to be on the horizon at this point of getting some contract extension, and he's the top dog there, really along with, of course, Sam Laporta, an awesome tight end one in Dynasty. With Amon-Ra, we know we can get a top 3 season from him this past season. He is a absolute stud. And again, this sweet spot of these guys, they're right in and around their primes, right? 25 years old, in and around that range, whether it's maybe at some point next season or maybe with CeeDee Lamb. Look, he just turned 25. So this is my wide receiver, my tier one in Dynasty. Let me know if you guys agree with this, if you think it should be a little bit smaller or larger in terms of this tier size. But now let's move on into tier two. We go from a top 4, now we're going into the top 10. So in a tier of 6, certainly first, for me, it's Puka. It's Puka Nacua as my wide receiver 5 at the top of this tier 2. Okay. I've debated even sneaking him up to tier 1. There's a 5th round pick, almost stigma. Similar, you could argue, to what Amon Ra had. A mid round, not such a high draft pick as these guys presumptively succeed in him right here, that we'll get to in a second. Puka, unreal rookie season, breaking records. I think, look, ultimately, it's not the 5th round pick stigma that's affecting me, that's restricting me here. I don't think I'm restricting at all with a wide receiver 5 valuation here, top of tier 2. For me, it's just the Stafford situation. What exactly is the quarterback going to look like in terms of who's throwing Puka the ball in maybe 2026? Okay, so we'd like to play, I think, playing in 2 to 3 year windows, and especially when you're ranking, you've got to obviously project, okay? The 4P model, or really it's not a model, it's just a art, right? A very subjective approach that I apply in this, right? The 4Ps of course, we can look at production, but then we ultimately have to project, and then we ultimately have to factor in the perception around these players, right? And just the general perspective of, okay, who are they in and around? We're all relatively ranking these peers, this group of receivers. So for me, Puka, he's at the top of tier 2. I expect huge things in 2024, right? Hitting the ground running. And I think, look, if he does that, then it only builds his momentum and his steam to firmly be in tier 1. It's just a lot of unknowns, I feel like, with Matthew Stafford. That's just where I'm at. As there's a lot of unknowns with, well, who's going to be throwing Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors, and we'll get to him in a second, who's going to be throwing these rookies the football, right? And I think that is, of course, a fair question. If they go out and produce what Puka just put on the field in his rookie year, then you could argue one of these rookies who's going to get a top 5, top 10 draft capital, they're going to be right next to rivaling Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, depending on how you have it as wide receiver 1. I mean, they're going to be rivaling that, going for that crown if they have that type of Puka season. And so then, look, maybe it just begs the case, am I too low on Puka? Guys, let me know in the comments. I feel like this is more than fair. It's a very fair ranking for Puka. He's basically climbed from the back end of this tier to the top end of this tier for me since my first rankings of the receiver position. And so with Marvin Harrison and with Malik Neighbors, these are two guys that are unbelievable prospects. And honestly, look, I've been saying it. I've been mocked and ridiculed at first in my wide receiver rankings, that first installment of this video, where I said, look, Marv and Malik are very much in the same tier for me. And what are we hearing more and more? And maybe you can say it's just smokescreen. I don't believe that whatsoever. Malik Neighbors is a difference maker. Malik Neighbors is literally ranked above Marvin Harrison by NFL.com, the lead ranker, the lead prospect evaluator, so to speak, Lance Zierlein. Okay. And these are serious opinions, right? They're not just doing it for show. These are guys that are actually putting something on the line with their opinions. And look, mine is somewhat in alignment, at least for Malik Neighbors. He has a more fantasy conducive skill set. Okay. There, I said it. His explosiveness, the yards after the catch. Look, Marv and Malik are both very much going to walk in as a dominant receiver 1 in their offenses. That is truly my expectation, and that's why they warrant these top 7 ranking in the receiver landscape. Okay, where exactly they go, your bet is kind of as good as mine, honestly. You know, you look at the Cardinals, although they could maybe get a T. Higgins. We'll see. You look at the Chargers, although they're rumored to want to trade out, right, to just try to protect Justin Herbert, to try to really solidify a Greg Roman, a Jim Harbaugh, of course, offensive identity there, where you think of running the ball. So we'll see what happens there with the Chargers. But then you look at the Giants. Look, maybe it's not so attractive to the eye at first, but they walk into a spot where they will be the number 1 option, okay? And so then if they're the number 1 option and they have that much investment, of course they're going to get schemes some targets, and of course they have the transcendent type of talent to do it with not a lot. That's just my 2 cents, okay? And so we move on from the top 2 receivers of this class, this 2024 draft class, to then Garrett Wilson. And so it's what we really hoped 2023 was going to be with a healthy Aaron Rodgers. Look, We hopefully have Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. Hopefully, no presidential, vice presidential run there with RFK. But imagine that does happen. I mean, can you even imagine? I mean, Aaron Rodgers would be the guy, but nonetheless, with Garrett Wilson, talk about a dominant player. And look, now they've got Mike Williams there. Doesn't really make me change my view of Garrett all that much, if at all, right? He's the number one option in that offense. Aaron Rodgers knows the type of talent he is, right? They already have built a chemistry, or they did, right, leading up to the start of week 1 last year. And he's going to be recognized as such with game planning. Mike Williams is going to have a nice role, right? And I like Mike Williams as a nice potential dart throw in later rounds, right? But not really factoring in or taking away, I feel like, Garrett Wilson's value whatsoever. Okay. And then A.J. Brown sliding a little bit, so to speak. And for me, look, he's such a dominant player, right? He's basically his age 26, 27 season. So he's kind of getting up there a little bit slightly, but he's still a dominant player. And I really don't think aging is going to do him too dirty, so to speak. He's such a physical yards after the catch beast, right? I don't see that really. I see that aging in some ways like fine wine. I'll just say it. I'll put it that way, right? And so you look at, for me, he's just maybe sliding a little bit back in this tier because of how highly, of course, I view these other guys, but more so too with Saquon Barkley there for the next 2-3 seasons. He is going to be more of a dominant factor in that Eagles offense, okay? I will say, easily, comfortably say as an Eagles fan, a lot more than what we've seen, a Miles Sanders and a DeAndre Swift. No disrespect to those guys, but Saquon's just on a different plane. And so you have a Saquon. You've got Jalen Hurts, obviously, in the run game. You've got Dallas Goedert there. You've got, of course, Devontae Smith. So it's still so indicative of how incredibly talented A.J. Brown is to even be in this tier, to be still a top 10 receiver, right, in the dynasty landscape, given how many playmakers Kellen Moore is going to have to scheme and figure out how to distribute the ball. So, rounding out this tier, for me, it's Rome Odunze. Okay, Rome Odunze, he was in tier 3 in my first installment of these rankings. But look, he is in this tier, the top tier of receiver prospects in this 2024 draft class. Okay, and you see the mock drafts, right? You see the combine effort. You see the athletic score. This guy is very much possible. The potential is right there, up with Marv and Malik, in my view. He is a difference maker, and he's going to get top 10 draft capital. So then it's really going to, in some respects, I could see the landing spot being a bit of a difference maker for any of these three, how you rank it as far as the top 3 in this draft class, right? And I want to be clear too. It's like I've seen, Marv is, this no doubt 101 narrative in all Superflex, obviously one quarterback formats, which I just never quite got behind. And especially think about how saturated this receiver position is. That argument in and of itself, and obviously with this 2024 class, and I'm saying the position in general, that in effect should push down some of the receivers, right? Because the quarterbacks, you want to take swings on quarterbacks. So that's just an aside on my draft strategy, I guess. But that rounds out the top 10, so to speak, of my dynasty receiver rankings, rounding out tier 2, guys. Let me know if I got it right or got it so far wrong in the comments. Respond to all of you. We're building a community here. Let's get into tier 3. It just so happens that tier 3, well, it's a group of 3. Starting off with Drake London. Is that a bold take? Of course. Yes, it is. When I think about the age, of course, he's going into year 3, right? Going to be his age 22 season. He produced in some capacity, okay, his first 2 seasons. Not anything crazy, but what could you have expected with having, stop disrespecting Taylor Heineke and Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder. Those guys are nice as backups. He hasn't had anything even close to an average NFL starter, NFL passer throwing him the ball, and nothing close. And now he's got Kirk Cousins, who is more than an average NFL passer for the next 2 or 3 years. And he's got now Zach Robinson, as the offensive coordinator. Oh, where is Zach Robinson? Oh, he was only in, actually, look at the guy right above him, only in LA, helped scheming up Puka Nakua to have the monster season that he just had. And he's acknowledged how much of a talent, how much of a stud Drake London is. Now that, makes it even more attractive coming over, obviously being the OC for this new Atlanta Falcons offense. And I want to say new, I want to say as much of a deviation as really we've seen. So that is where I'm at with Drake London, the number one receiver in that offense, a Kirk Cousins supported offense, a Sean McVay tree offense. Okay. Huge, huge factors that I think are just boding well for a mega breakout season for a Drake London. Maybe I get it totally wrong, totally off base, but look, I know they've got a Darnell Mooney, right? I know they've got a Kyle Pitts, right? And of course, a Bijan Robinson. But then even going back earlier to where, obviously with A.J. Brown, and that's me really trying to give an honest evaluation, obviously with the Eagles offense. Well, with talented, competent offenses, you have multiple guys. So I just want to make that point clear, right? And that doesn't just, it's not just a negative in a vacuum, right? It just obviously with ranking within a tier with AJ, that's just why, look, I ultimately had to, with the age and given how talented some of these other guys are, that's where he landed. But with Drake London, I don't see why there's so much fear of, well, oh, there's all these other guys, okay? Well, he is the guy in terms of the wide receiver, the number one wide receiver for Kirk Cousins. So I just want to make that clear and firmly put my foot on why he's at the top of tier 3 here. And followed by Tyreek Hill, of course, unbelievable difference maker at the position who, if we're playing in this 2-3 year window, I think he's still playing at least through 2025. I know that's been kind of a hot button with his contract, but I think, look, I think he's at least 2 more years. So I've got to recognize Tyreek Hill here as a wide receiver 12 in my rankings. And then we move on to Chris Olave rounding out this tier. Right, with Chris Olave, look, a lot of comparisons. He's been with Garrett Wilson kind of throughout his career, associated with him for obvious reasons, right? But he is the number one receiver in that Saints offense by a long shot, by a wide margin. Okay. And I think Derek Carr, he is an average quarterback, right? So hopefully, I project things to be a little bit better, right? More of a chemistry, just more conducive to a very, very nice Chris Olave season. I think just to put it that way. But this really rounds out with tier 3 here, kind of keeping it short and sweet with 3 guys who, look, they are still dynasty wide receiver 1s on your fantasy team. Into tier 4, now it's another group of 3. And this group of 3, look, I want to characterize it effectively as the high end wide receiver 2 types in dynasty for me, but have the potential upside to really jump into the tier above to be wide receiver, low wide receiver 1s for my money, depending on how you look at it. But again, it's such a convoluted, really deep position. So these are fine margins, right? And I want to make it clear, just because we go from a Odunze to a London, from a St. Brown to a Nakua, the end of one tier to the beginning of a next, almost a rhetorical question. How do you qualify? How do you quantify that? We're talking fine margins. So for me, if I was to best try to put a descriptor on it, we're talking in the range of second round pick delta in terms of the values going from one to the next in terms of the back end to the front end. Front to front, maybe a little bit more, you could argue. It's such a subjective process. This is just my process. These are my views. Everybody's entitled to their own. And let me know, scream at me for why I have Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore, and Jalen Waddle here in my tier 4. Rounding out effectively the top 15, top 16, really, in terms of the dynasty wide receiver rankings. And look, they are in tier 4 for the reason that they are high-end, top 10 to top 15 is where I see their relative fantasy production. If not possibly higher, look at what DJ Moore just did, right? But now he's got a Keenan Allen there, but he has a Caleb Williams now. I think all signs it's no secret at this point. And then with Brandon Ayuk, you're looking at a guy that, look, I kind of have drawn a very fine line here from my previous rankings an installment of this series for wide receivers. With Ayuk, it's a lot of uncertainty. He's reached a relative value ceiling, potentially, in my eyes, at least in San Francisco. The efficiency, the yards per catch, it's just not sustainable. So it's just not sustainable. I just don't know how he really does anything more than up to, wide receiver 12, wide receiver 13 type finish that he had this past season. And so this is where I think we have to honor and recognize him for the foreseeable future in terms of rankings, right? But I don't see why he necessarily should be in that tier 3, at least in my view. So rounding out this tier, you've got Jalen Waddle, right? And with Waddle, he's with a Tyreek Hill, okay? He's with some really nice running backs who, look, McDaniel coming from that San Fran tree, he ideally, in a perfect world, he wants to be able to run the ball at a decent clip. And then, of course, factor in his speed weapons at the receiver position, right? But then you even see, oh my God, pictured at the Texas Pro Day with Xavier Worthy, does he just have a type? It's interesting. Not saying, not overreacting to that, but with the Dolphins, really trying to make it a Tua contract year, do they just say, look, man, we'll give you everything. We'll throw the kitchen sink at you. It's a really prove it, maybe not a whole year, but they really just want to see what maybe even half a year, right? What it looks like maybe with Tua having as good a weaponry. Obviously, they added Jonnu Smith. I don't think that's such a difference maker. No disrespect to Jonnu, but I just see a crowded Miami Dolphins room. And if we're looking at, again, stressing 2 to 3 year windows, I just don't see how Waddle needs to be ranked any significantly higher than this range of a bordering, top 15 receiver in Dynasty. I know it's uncomfortable to say, but it's, look, okay, let's say he has Brandon Ayuk season, right? Where he's going to have to be incredibly efficient. And he obviously is an incredibly explosive player. I'm just not as high on Waddle as maybe I once was. And I think it's still a very respectful ranking. I mean, maybe I'm totally off base. Let me know what you guys think of this tier 3. Again, in my tier 4 of a Brandon Ayuk, of a DJ Moore, of a Jalen Waddle. Waddle being, of course, the younger or youngest of this trio, right? But not by an incredible margin. I want to make that clear, right? Not by an insane margin necessarily. Last but certainly not least, in this tier 5, we have a jumbled group of 8, ESPN the Ocho, starting off with Michael Pittman. And look, I want to make it clear, with these guys in this tier, I still like them a lot. Love them. Really good assets to have in Dynasty. But they're guys that I just don't really necessarily see the top 10 elite wide receiver 1 upside. I see them as comfortably in the wide receiver 2 conversation. And so with Michael Pittman, just got that nice contract there in Indianapolis, but I look at their identity with AR, with JT. They want to run the ball. And it doesn't preclude, so I don't want to necessarily just fall to the extremes, right, of how it totally is a negative. It helps Michael Pittman, right? It helps having a multiple offense. I just don't see, we haven't necessarily seen it, nor do I see, in terms of projecting, that top 10 high-end, breaking the seal of a high-end wide receiver 2, okay? And so with Nico Collins, more or less the same. Look, I love him being with CJ Stroud. He and Pittman were pretty much neck and neck in terms of the production, in terms of the fantasy ranks this past season, in around that 12, 13, 14 range. And I see, look, that's roughly their target for the foreseeable future. And so I have to draw the line somewhere. Let me know if I've gotten it wrong. But with Zay, a guy that is a wide receiver 1 in Baltimore for sure. But now you've got Derrick Henry. You, of course, are going to have Mark Andrews there. Those tight ends, assuming their share in the passing game. And I think we're just talking about the theme being just some artificial caps in terms of circumstance for one reason or another on these players to being the upper echelon to being firmly wide receiver ones. So then they are comfortable. They are very nice wide receiver twos to have in Dynasty, and to expect that type of production, 15 to 24 fantasy production on your rosters. So good pieces to have. Devontae Smith. There in Philly, clearly wide receiver two. But who knows exactly what Kellen Moore and that offense looks like. So with Devontae Smith, look, a guy that I can reasonably count on for a top 20 season, but nothing too much more than that. Sounded like a broken record, but with T. Higgins, look, maybe he's the guy that is the true wild card, right? Really mired in ambiguity, uncertainty. As you could argue, look, with Ayuk at the top of at the tier 4, right? Guys that are essentially on the trade block. And with T, look, maybe he goes to the Cardinals, maybe he goes to the Patriots. And so then he's clear wide receiver one, right? And then maybe his opportunity, the ceiling and the floor kind of raise together simultaneously. But obviously with Cincinnati, with the Joe Burrow, nice situation there. But maybe it possibly improves with T. Higgins. I just see a guy that I want as a wide receiver too on my team. Nothing too much more, nothing less. With Tank Dell, look, it's kind of a 1A, 1B there with Nico. And of course, they've got Dalton Schultz re-signed there. Now you got Joe Mixon, too. Joe Mixon, very nice running back, who I'd love to target. A little bit of an aside there. But with Tank, look, coming off the injury, really looked good. And I think with CJ Stroud, sure, he has a ceiling of maybe that 12 for it sucks we didn't get to see that whole season, but maybe he's got that ceiling of what the top tier, the guys at the top of this tier with Pittman, with Nico, right? Maybe he would have been right in that 13 overall receiver range. So I think I've recognized him here accordingly. And then with Rashee Rice, of course, really emerged in Kansas City. They bring in Hollywood Brown, who it's only a 1-year deal, right? You've got Travis Kelce, but maybe he's only there for 1 more year. Just feels like it's almost an annual game we're going to play with Pat Mahomes, and he, maybe they sign a guy. Obviously, that's Hollywood already, but then I feel like they pick a guy potentially at the back end of this first round, somewhere possibly in day 2. And so Rashee Rice, really nice, not trying to rhyme there on purpose, wide receiver 2 in Dynasty, a guy that could very well, though, have nice spike weeks, given he's connected to Pat Mahomes, right? So you love you some Rashee Rice, as I at least hope you do. And last but not least, rounding out wide receiver 24, for me, it's Brian Thomas Jr., all right? Wide receiver 4 in this 2024 draft class. He's a guy that, look, I think he could very well be ranked higher than this. Maybe he's a guy that has as good a shot as any to jump tiers relative to where we are right now. He gets maybe that mid-first draft capital. Maybe he goes to Buffalo and becomes Josh Allen's new receiver. And so then maybe you see him really jump at least to tier 4, maybe early in the season. Before long, he even jumps into higher in that tier 3 range, right? He's a guy that I really think has a chance to be a wide receiver 1 at the NFL level, and to then at least parlay that into a wide receiver 2 in terms of the fantasy floor, and maybe it's a lot higher in terms of the ceiling. So, guys, that is my top 24 updated wide receiver rankings. Let me know what I got totally off base, how I completely messed this up. Did I cook, or did I completely fall on my face? In any event, I look forward to connecting and engaging with you all in the comments and returning soon with a rookie mock 6.0, guys. Have a great weekend if your team's in March. Hopefully they did better than my Gamecocks. Have a wonderful weekend. Peace.